Good evening. Welcome to the Bothell City Council. Would you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. All council members are present except for Mayor Freed, who is absent and excused. Next up, we would have the agenda, and there's been a request to move AB 14-78 to immediately after the visitor section. Is there any objections to that at all? Is to accommodate a guest speaker from Puget Sound Air Quality? Okay. Councilmember Sandberg.
Can I add some time to, let's see, the AB 1474? I have some questions. 1476.
And what are you thinking?
Like 20 minutes to each of those.
Add 20 minutes to each? Mm-hmm. Is there any objections? Okay, we'll add 20 minutes to AB 1474 and AB 1476.
And 77.
And 77. Any objection to 77? And we're adding those if needed. Okay, are there any council reports? Hearing in Andy, or Councilman Ream.
We could take it up with the Puget Sound Clean Air guy coming, but I need guidance from you guys on how to vote on the Suburban Cities Sound Cities Association. Whether you want me to pile on with everybody to vote to write a letter to Puget Sound Clean Air Agency or not.
We'll have that discussion after the presentation.
Okay.
Okay, well, next up we have visitors. Is there a sign-up sheet? Nobody signed up? Okay, well then that will take us right to AB 14-78. This is to consider the rate increase proposed by the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency for 2015. We have a presentation by City Manager Bob Stowe and Craig Kenworthy, the Executive Director of the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And again, I'm simply going to turn the meeting or the presentation over to the Executive Director for the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. As you mentioned, Craig Kenworthy is here this evening. I had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Kenworthy a couple weeks ago prior to our council meeting. As you remember, we had a brief discussion about the proposed rate increase consistent with the agency strategic plan. And Craig was gracious enough to accept our invitation, knowing that we're going to be discussing this matter here this evening, to come and present a bit of information to you and then be available for questions that council might have. So at this point, I'd ask Craig, and with council's pleasure, ask Craig to sit at the study table with us.
Please sit at the table with us.
Thank you.
Welcome to Bothell.
Thank you. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with our agency, we are thank you.
Bless you.
For those of you not familiar with the agency, we are a special purpose regional. Thank you. We're a special purpose regional agency. When the state and federal Clean Air Acts were passed in the early 1970s, Congress gave the states the option of running their own air quality programs or having EPA do it. Washington chose a hybrid approach to say that either Ecology would do the work or counties could choose to have a clean air agency or band together as a multi-county authority. So our 4 counties, same as Puget Sound Regional Council, King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Kitsap, decided to have a multi-county agency. So we're governed by elected officials from each of those counties, and the way the legislature structured that is that it's a county official from each county and an official from the largest city in each of the 4 counties. So an official from Everett, an official from Seattle, official from Bremerton, and from Tacoma. And then they jointly appoint 1 member of the public at large to represent the public, so we have 9 board members. So we've sent you a copy of our new strategic plan, and I'm not going to try to go through anything in detail in regard to that. I'll talk about a couple of issues that we're focused in on, that our board gave us direction to focus in on, and just mention briefly some of the reasons for the proposed increase. So we're funded in 3 different ways as an agency. We're funded by fees paid by regulated businesses. So think Boeing, for example, pays permit fees to us so that we can do the work on their air quality permits, down to large-scale coffee roasters, dry cleaners. There's about 3,000 regulated sources that we have delegated authority from EPA to work with in the region. We're also funded by grants, and we currently have 21 grants, non-recurring grants that we brought into the region. So that's things like work that we did to clean up school buses in the 2 school districts in the city and throughout the region to reduce diesel particulate pollution from school buses. That also is work like cleaning up the Sounder Transit locomotives, that we have projects going on that. So we have those grants coming in. We also have a small recurring grant from EPA every year that's projected to decline in the next few years because they're reallocating their formula based on population increases in other parts of the country. And then the third sort of leg of the stool of our funding is the local per capita assessment. The legislature said when they created the agencies that the boards of the agencies could assess the jurisdictions for air quality work that was not funded by the state or federal governments. Back in the 70s, the federal government and the state government said they would pretty much pay for everything. That's never actually happened. It's probably not a shock to all of you. And so our board has assessed the per capita rate for a number of years. In 2009, the board, after that year, froze the per capita rate in recognition of some of the things jurisdictions were going through and kept that rate flat for the last 5 years. We're now at a point where, in implementing our new strategic plan, we're needing to ask for a rate increase, and our board is considering a rate increase in a couple of different ways, and I'll talk about what those are in just a moment. The thing that I want to touch on out of our strategic plan that I think is really critical is the link between the public health issues that we're working on and economic development in the region. And what I mean by that is that there are a couple of federal standards that we are at risk of violating throughout the region. One of them we're in violation in Pierce County right now for a pollutant called fine particulate matter. That's a product of combustion, so diesel fuel, some industrial sources, wood burning. That drives up the fine particulate matter when we have stagnation events, and we've been in violation in Pierce County, and we've had to expend a lot of money to try to get them cleaned up. The reason that's important, and I think this is in some of your information, is that when we're in violation of the federal standard, or what's called non-attainment, 2 economic consequences can happen. The first one happens immediately when you're placed in that status, and that is that businesses that produce that type of pollutant are required to use more expensive pollution controls. So I mentioned Boeing earlier. Boeing tracks the status that we're in on this because they recognize that they would have to spend a lot more money on pollution controls. The simplest way to describe this is that when we're in compliance with the federal standard, my engineers can consider cost. They can say, okay, what's the reasonable cost of the pollution control equipment? When we're in violation, and this is where Pierce County is right now, we're not allowed to consider cost. If the equipment is technologically feasible, no matter how much it costs, we have to require the businesses to use that equipment. So Pierce County has told me that they've had businesses choose not to locate into the county. It's for expansion of existing businesses or new businesses coming in, so it's a deterrent to economic development. More relevant to Bothell, King, Snohomish, and Pierce in a different way is our summertime smog or ozone issues. We are currently in compliance with the federal standard for smog or ozone, and smog or ozone is a product of chemicals in the atmosphere and sun and heat. So this is the reason we don't have as many days as California does where we're at risk, because we just don't have as many hot, sunny days. But what can happen is the pollution coming from the core of our urban area actually cooks in the atmosphere, drifts east, and causes violations that are monitored in Enumclaw. The reason that's important is that when EPA designates an area in violation of the standard, they don't just designate the area where the air quality is bad, they designate the entire area that's contributing to that problem. So the last time we violated the ozone standard in the 90s, they put all 3 counties, they didn't put Kitsap in, they put all 3 counties into the non-attainment status that I've talked about, and we've been in a maintenance mode. We got back under the standard. What's coming up is EPA has been sued because they have not reviewed the standard, and they're required under the law to review the standard every 5 years. And just in the last few days, there was a lawsuit pending. The court ordered them to release a new standard by late next year. The last time they reviewed the standard, they ignored the advice of their scientific advisory panel and did not tighten the standard as much as they suggested. We have been bouncing around just above and just below the existing standard and just about where the range of the new standard will be, depending on where they set it. If they set it at the bottom end of the range, we have a high likelihood we'll go into non-attainment or violation. If they set it at the upper end of the range, there's a chance we will avoid it. It's a rolling 3-year average, so it's not a single year. But that's the first and foremost goal the board has set for us, is making sure we're in compliance with federal standards because of those consequences. The second potential consequence, and this is much more rare, is if you don't clean up your air quality problems, you can eventually have some of your federal highway dollars moved away, reassigned, and then eventually taken away. That was a hammer that Congress put in place in the 1970s under the Clean Air Act to tell areas, you've got to clean up this problem. That has been very rare. On the other hand, there's an environmental group that's been suing EPA now, saying that they're not acting quickly enough on the federal highway dollar situation. So it is a risk in the long term if we didn't clean up, if we went into ozone non-attainment. So I just gave you a lot of information on a lot of technical fronts. So I'm going to actually pause there before I actually talk about cost and the proposed rate increase, just to see what questions you've got about that, if I can.
Well, let's go ahead and just have your whole presentation,
Okay.
and then council we can
Okay.
ask questions from there.
Okay. So as I mentioned, we're funded in 3 different ways. The board has kept the rate flat. The board implemented or approved our new strategic plan, asked us to cost out what it would take to implement the strategic plan. I worked with my staff, and then I cut some of the things they proposed to implement the strategic plan and said these are the reasonable investments we think we ought to make in implementing the strategic plan, starting with that goal of making sure we meet federal standards, addressing other things like hotspots of pollution in areas where we've got people who are disadvantaged, being exposed to too much things like diesel pollution and other pollution sources, enhancing our ability to monitor air quality on a finer scale. An example I'll give you on that is Tukwila the other day talked to me about putting a temporary air quality monitor in near their intermodal yard because BNSF is now telling them they're going to expand that yard, and they have a lot of diesel truck traffic coming out of that yard by their community center, their parks, and a residential neighborhood. Right now we have a network of required monitors from EPA, and we do some temporary monitoring, but we want to be able to expand that ability as well. So the board's initial proposal that they asked me to send out to the jurisdictions was to increase the per capita rate by 25 cents. To give you some sense of what that is, for Bothell, your current amount that you pay is $22,000. If they instituted that in 1 year, the amount you would pay would be about $32,000. I've been getting feedback from our various jurisdictions. We have 82 jurisdictions that we work for in the 4 counties, and I can share with you that I have a letter from the Snohomish County Cities and Towns jurisdictions and from some of our other jurisdictions who have said, we support what you're trying to do. We'd like you to take a look at breaking this into steps and not doing this all at once. It's not a huge amount of dollars for some cities, but it's a substantial percentage increase. So we've had feedback from some of the cities saying, while we could absorb it in a single year, we would prefer that you see if you can do this in a couple of steps. Based on that initial feedback at our April board meeting, I asked the board what they wanted me to do, and they have me in our meeting next week bringing back 2 scenarios. One is the initial proposal of doing the rate once and then also saying we would keep it flat for the next 3 years. The other is to do it in 2 steps of 15 cents and 10 cents, so it would be smaller amounts in the front end of it, and then there'd be a second increase in the second year, and then we would again try to keep it flat for the 3rd year after that. So that's where the board is right now. They're going to discuss that next week. They've asked me to go out and seek feedback from the jurisdictions in terms of their perspective on that. I can mention a couple things I sometimes get questions about. This is a statutory assessment, so it isn't an optional assessment for the cities in terms of the assessment that the board sets. The board recognizes, though, that they want to get feedback from the cities on this. That's why I think with this meeting I'm up to 41 of the 82 jurisdictions that I've either seen or talked to get feedback from them on the phone. That's not counting Sound Cities Incorporated and King. That's just the direct conversations with the jurisdictions. So that's essentially the outline of that. I could talk a little bit more about what we're doing in the strategic plan, but I also want to respect your time. The thing that our board has to weigh is that in addition to meeting federal requirements is that over the last few years the science has gotten clearer and clearer about the other detrimental effects of air pollution. We tend to think of things like asthma, people having lung issues, lung irritation, and that certainly is a direct effect of air pollution. At the same time, the science is getting clearer about the effects on things like pregnant women and small children. So the example that I tend to give is the problem Pierce County is having, which is called fine particulate matter. When we have high levels of that and we can get higher levels across the region. We don't get quite as high levels in King County because we tend to have better wind speeds than the bowl that we sort of have in the Puyallup River Valley. But when that pollutant level is high, we get more ear infections in small children. And what can happen is some parents are able to take their kids to the doctor, get the antibiotics, get it treated. Some parents never get that treated. And the ear infection can fester. You can actually have hearing damage for the child. There's a lot of other studies about the other impacts of additional stressors on mothers and kids and what can happen in terms of developmental deficits over time. So our board is weighing what to do in terms of implementing the strategic plan, weighing the very real concerns of the jurisdictions from a financial standpoint, recognizing that we kept the rate flat for 5 years, and what regional investments we want to make in those air quality issues, both on things like the economic development effects I talked about, and then on the human and public health effects that I talked about. So let me stop there and see what questions you've got.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and open up for council questions? Anyone? Councilmember Sandberg.
Is Pierce County in violation because of its topography or because of source pollutants or both?
It's both. So what happens in Pierce County is the area that's in violation is the urbanized part of Pierce County south of the Key Peninsula. 50% of the homes in an area do not have natural gas to the house. And so there's a lot more wood burning for heat in the winter, and that pushes us over the top. We have some background of diesel, ship emissions, et cetera. So I usually tell the public down there we won't solve that problem just by addressing wood smoke, but we can't solve it if we don't address wood smoke. And then the topography, basically the mass of Mount Rainier and the way the Puyallup River Valley is shaped, we get inversions there more often where we just don't get enough wind clearing the pollution out. So it's both effects.
And then, okay, thank you. And we get blowover of pollution from China and from Asia. So how is that affecting what you're having to deal with? I mean, I would imagine the EPA doesn't care whether that pollution comes from China and then cooks over here and creates an ozone problem. I imagine they don't care about it, but we still have to deal with it.
We do still have to deal with it. So the distinction I'll draw for us is our atmospheric physicist at the office, and I've had a bunch of conversations about this, that we actually get most of our transport from Asia from March to May. That's when we get the highest levels of pollution coming over. California is estimating that up to 8 to 10% of their ozone is coming from Asia. But because we don't have those hot days, even today I just checked our ozone levels, we're still in the good category. We don't have as many hot days in March to May. So while we're getting some transport of that pollutant, it's not happening when we're hitting the levels that come close to the federal standard. And we get some transport of the particulate matter I talked about, but again, March to May, we're coming out of the heating season when we tend to have the higher levels in some pockets. So we're actually fortunate in one respect in that when we're getting the peak of our Asian transport, it's not hitting when we're having our biggest air quality problems.
And then just one last question. So can you explain in concrete terms what that 25-cent per capita increase is going to get us? Like a few things out of your strategic plan?
So the first thing it does is it keeps my transportation team working on the things they've been working on, which is the focus of our ozone or smog work, because our ozone is driven largely by transportation emissions. We don't have as many industrial sources as other parts of the country do. So the 15 cents of it keeps the transportation team doing, part of it keeps the transportation team doing their work and being able to work on fleets. That's some of the same team that did the school district work, et cetera, does our electric vehicle work, those kind of things. It also keeps us with our environmental justice coordinator who works to do work across communities that are disadvantaged and enables her to do that work. And then it also enables us to catch up on some of our technology issues. Our software is proprietary a lot of the time. We have to develop our own software. And some of that technology we've let slide for a while, and it's getting antiquated. For example, there isn't an off-the-shelf product for people in Pierce County to upload a picture of their old stove when we're doing a wood stove change-out program for them and to qualify for the stove program. So that supports that kind of work. The other 10 cents of the increase allows those programs, in addition to our monitoring program, to have outreach support to be able to go out and work in communities, and allows them to have administrative outreach support for things like the transportation team so that they are able to do some of the work and be out in the field more and not do so much of the administrative outreach work. And then the last component of the 10 cents is it allows us to reduce some of our technology risk in addition to the earlier investments, because we're running into some problems with our systems where, for example, our air quality tools that the public can use are at risk of collapsing because the software in the system is antiquated. So those are sort of the buckets of things that the two parts of that would do. If the board adopts the stepped approach, then I'm going to have a conversation with them about whether they want to cut back on something specific in the strategic plan, cut across the board on some things, take greater risks with the technology system, and that's part of the conversation I'll have with them next week.
Anybody else? Councilmember Lamb.
Thanks for your presentation. I appreciated that. So did I understand you correctly that you haven't had an increase in this rate since 2009, is that
Right.
right? So for 5 years.
Right.
And then what was it like before that? I mean, was it annualized or?
So the board was in the process of doing a set of annual steps. They had done a 5-cent increase, and they were doing 1 or 2 cent increases when the economy crashed. So they were in a process of doing steps in regard to that. And I will tell you that we would not be seeking this size of an increase if we had not had to solve Pierce County's problem. We have invested millions of dollars in Pierce County's problem, and I probably should have said this earlier. I've gotten this question from some king cities. The legislature does not allow us to charge a different rate to a community just because they are having the worst air quality problem. But we've had to make we've used our discretionary funds, and we collect some civil penalties, for example. We've used that money to solve the Pierce County problem. The reason our board, besides the fact that we're a regional agency, thinks that we need to be able to make those investments is, for example, we changed out half the wood stoves in Darrington in the last few years and kept them from violating that federal standard. Darrington would have never been able to make those kind of investments.
Right.
And we never would have been able to charge them enough even if we could charge a differential rate. So for us, it's a combination of using our funds to solve Pierce County's problem, keeping it flat for that long, and then the investments in the strategic plan are the drivers of the proposed increase.
And then as a total percentage of your budget, what does this assessment, how does this assessment weigh in?
It's about 25 to 30% of our budget, and the reason I'm giving you a range is that when we have some of those non-recurring grants in a year where we bring in for several $1 million on a project, that reduces the percentage of the per capita. For our general operating budget without those non-recurring grants, it's about 25% of our funding.
And so over the last 5 years then, that funding, that portion of your budget has been completely flat.
Yes, with the exception of that we do get a tiny amount each year in population growth because it's a per capita assessment.
Right.
So we picked up probably $20,000 here and there from that assessment.
How about the remaining 70%? Was that also flat during the time? Did it increase with inflation, or what happened with that?
A couple of things happened. We were very successful in bringing in grants into the region, and we brought $40 million in the last few years. That buffered the recession for us to some degree, and I was able to shift staff to working on some of those sort of piloting technology projects. The other part was our fee side. The businesses actually did not oppose a fee increase during that because for them the biggest thing is certainty.
Right.
They want to know that we have the team there to make sure the permits get done in the legal and timely manner because we and they are audited by EPA to make sure the permits are meeting legal requirements. So they were actually supportive of us making sure we didn't lose our fee-based team, our engineers and inspectors, to make sure that they were following federal law. So that actually went up, the fees went up during that window to be able to do that work.
And so as the conversation stands now, the board is contemplating whether or not they do this all at once or in a phased approach, and you're here kind of seeking, do we want to have it be all at once or in a phased approach, or suggest that it's not?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally up to you as the city and what
Right.
you want to suggest. I'm just sharing where some other people have been, and there's some cities have said they don't have any comments or concerns about the increase. Now, obviously, some of the Pierce County cities have seen us a lot lately in that regard, and we're solving their problem. But there are cities in each of the counties who've said, they don't see an issue with the increase. They understand what we're doing. And then there are some cities who've said, we think this is too big of an increase. And there are some cities who've said, we'd like to see you break this up into steps. So I will take back whatever the council says back to the board directly, and obviously whatever Sound City says if they take a position back to the board in addition.
And so let's assume for the sake of argument that it happens at once, that you get all of the increase in a single year. If that were to happen, is there a plan like the board was working on in 2009 to have some sort of normalized rate structure? Because there's something appealing about the idea that you don't, and I certainly understand after 5 years of nothing that you would say we need to have a makeup increase and it would be larger, but at some point there'd be a longer term plan to say let's normalize it by CPI or something.
Right.
Like
I think what the board is looking at is what they initially said was we want to be able to tell people what it'll be for the next 3 years so there's certainty. Right. So that was the idea of we make these investments now, finish the job in Pierce County, and then we tell people it'll be flat for 3 years. And then I think their hope was then we would go back to a more normalized situation. recognizing that if the dog blows up, for example, in our ozone situation, we're going to have a major amount of work to do, but we will shift our focus if that happens from some of the other things.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Evans.
Thank you. When I first reviewed this, the thought came to my mind was the Metro issue that just went out and and failed significantly in the cities, and of course King County is struggling, certainly Seattle, to get that. And you've kind of answered that question, but I also, I mean, it's Pierce that's having the problem. It's King County that is the worst, apparently, for air quality.
For ozone levels.
Ozone,
Pierce
okay.
is having that fine particulate. That's a
Okay.
wintertime driven problem. King County has the highest levels for the summer smog issues.
And in your letter of May 7th, under Goal 1.1, meet federal air quality standards, it makes reference to the ozone. King County is at risk of violating federal ozone standard, resulting in higher cost of business. Because Pierce and Snohomish County emissions contribute to the problem, they'd also bear those costs. So the problem isn't evenly spread across the 4 counties. It does pick up in other areas and things.
It does. And so what happened the last time we violated the ozone standard was EPA did an analysis and decided that the whole 3 counties' transportation emissions were contributing to the violations in King County.
Yeah.
Kitsap gets left out of that, but it's a region-wide problem in that sense.
Okay. And this chart, so the green
The green is good air quality, right.
Green is good, and so you can see where it's moving to the southeast, I guess,
Right.
essentially, and getting caught up by Mount Rainier and some of that area. In here.
Yeah, so the mass of the Cascades tends to pin that in to some degree, and it also because ozone requires a certain amount of time and heat. That's why it's usually a summer in sunlight. So that's why in May we don't have higher levels even when it's warm. There's not enough hours of sunlight to cook it to cause the chemicals to get higher levels. So that's why at Enumclaw, for example, is where the monitor hits close to the existing federal standard and would be potentially over the new federal standard.
And I think you mentioned down in that area, one of the cities was having problems with air quality because of all the wood stoves and things. Now, how do these improvements get completed, or do you go into a community or an area and say, you need to do this, you need to convert these buses, or whatever the case may be, and they pay for that, or does that money come back from you in the form of a grant, or?
So really quickly, what hopefully happens is when we're working with the community is we bring grants in to do that work. So, for example, Darrington, we brought in state wood stove grants from the toxics account to help them do their change-outs. And in other communities, we've sometimes used things like our civil penalty funds. Our civil penalty funds by board policy are not allowed to pay for permanent staff time because we don't want a business source thinking they got a penalty from an inspector and they're paying his salary and when he writes the penalty. So we try to bring in regional, state, and federal dollars to do that work when we're doing conversions. Our school bus work was some state diesel fund money. The work on the Sounder transit locomotives is a federal grant that we received. So a lot of our maritime work tends to be federal grants where we try to clean up engines on the maritime sector.
So are those 100% grants, or are there still matching funds required from the agency?
Sometimes it's a matching fund requirement because of the competition nature of it where we need to bring some money in. Sometimes it's us picking up the administrative expense of it and trying to pass through the full amount of the grant on that. The state finally allowed us a little more administrative expense on the wood stove grants because for a long time the administrative expense wasn't even coming close to that component of it. So it varies from grant to grant.
I was just wondering what the incentive is to people to want to improve things. If it's a free deal for them, they increase their stove.
Yeah, for low income in Darrington, what we discovered was the older stoves are not only more polluting, you actually use more wood and they're less efficient. So there was an argument to be made that this stove, you'll have to cut less wood, you'll have to do less work to get it burning at that point.
Yeah.
And they're 50 to 60% cleaner from an air pollution standpoint.
And in regards to the step approach, or the 15 and 10, I read in here somewhere that you would lose $400,000, I think, in the first year or two if the step was put into place.
Right, and that's because what happens in our rates is our fiscal year is July 1 to June 30, but the rate changes on January 1 to match up with the jurisdictions. So the rate increase from our fiscal year is only in effect for half of our fiscal year, and so by breaking it into steps, we'd receive the first half of the increase in the first year, and then we'd get half the increase in the second year. So that reduces the total.
Okay. And how large is your staff? What?
Right now we have 78 people, but some of those are term employees working on the Pierce County problem, and so we're going to ramp down some of that work over the next few years as we get them closer to the finish line. So what we're projecting is we'll have about 74 to 75 FTE equivalents. We have some part-time staff. That includes some of our term staff as well, once we get through the Pierce County situation.
And just last question, you say there's 82 jurisdictions in this umbrella, and you've talked about half of them, 41 or so now. I mean, it's great information that you're providing, and it, like Councilmember Lamb said, it's been 5 years or so since we've had an increase, so certainly it seems like one's coming. What is the response? Are cities now that they're understanding this better, and maybe Councilmember Ream at the meeting, as people, as a community become more informed on this, are they then more supportive of it, or?
I think that they're more supportive of what the board is trying to do, and they're each weighing where they are fiscally in terms of the statement back. Like I said, we've had some jurisdictions who expressed no concerns. What the board directed me to do and what I've been trying to do when I said 41 is what I've actually been trying to do is in each county get to jurisdictions representing at least 80% of the total paid, so that I'm not, I would love to go to Carbonado again in Pierce County, actually go down there because we had a monitor site there with them. I'm not getting to index, but I'm trying to make sure we get to those. So I'm at about close to 75 to 80% in each of the counties of who pays the total amount of the assessment. So like I said, it's a little bit of a range, but I would say the vast majority of people are falling into, we understand what you're trying to do. We understand that this is a regional priority to work on some of these things, but we also would like to see you lessen the percentage by looking at doing this in steps.
And the board is going to discuss this again?
May 22nd.
May 22nd, and
Right.
hopefully make a decision at that time?
Yes, because by statute, we have to complete our budget by a date in June, and so we need them to tell us the rate so we can bring a budget to them in June for completion.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Councilmember Rayum.
I just have a couple quick things. I've worked with your agency a couple times, retrofitted a diesel fleet for a city, and worked with enforcement, and they've done fantastic work on both ends. I appreciate what you guys do. It's really important. I think it's a regional issue, which I'm glad we're tackling it regionally. But I do so I'm the member of this council that'll be at SCA tomorrow, Sound Cities Association. Are you going to be there?
I will be there.
Okay.
Yes.
Have you seen their position statement that they want us to vote upon?
I've seen their draft statement, and then I've also seen the proposed amendment by Kirkland, and I also understand that the packet said, obviously, the committee could decide to take a different position than that. So I've seen that statement, yes.
What's the Kirkland amendment?
The Kirkland amendment encourages us to consider how we would do the strategic plan in an incremental way. I think it's in your packet.
Okay.
For Sound Cities, and basically suggest an amendment to the initial proposal, which said that the jurisdictions opposed this and it was too much to absorb even in a 2-year cycle. So that the Kirkland amendment is language saying that we should be encouraged to break this out into steps, basically, not the rate in steps, but implementing the strategic plan. That's the way I read it, but I don't want to speak for Kirkland.
Okay. I haven't had a chance to see what Kirkland said, so. Okay, that was all the questions I had.
Okay.
Thanks.
Nothing for Councilmember Agnew? All right. I just had one. I'll thank council for all their questions. A lot of my questions get answered. But the one I had was, you said after the federal review and they set a new standard, is there a grace period, if you will, to become compliant, or all of a sudden it's, here's the standard, you're in violation, now we're going to hammer you?
Yeah, there's a grace period in the sense that what they do is they spend time analyzing where everyone is, and it's a rolling 3-year average. So it's 2 years after they issue the standard that they start telling people you are in violation. So there's a grace period to try to keep the emissions down during that window so that your rolling 3-year average is not in violation when they get to that sort of it's not technically called a grace period. It's the window the statute gives them to look at areas and decide whether you're in violation or not.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Evans.
So Bob, we're looking at going from 25,000 or 22,000 to 32,000, somewhere around there. And that's within our budget to make that type of increase?
Well, it's outside of the current budget cycle,
Right.
so this would fit in the new budget cycle. And so in answer to your question, yes, I think we can absorb that. The increase is not significant. The issue will become, will there be 30 or 40 other similar
Right.
types of increases
Right.
of similar magnitude, and I'd have a different response for you at that point. Initially, when I met with Craig, my reaction was this should be split into two components to allow additional time for jurisdictions to accommodate the request. But having spent more time looking at really the value to the region, I think Bothell should support, and my recommendation would be for the council to support the full amount. Now, that may not be the decision of Sound Cities, but I think there is value, given the additional request that's been made to us, that we support the full amount, and we allow for implementation to occur immediately rather than over a period of 2 years.
And I would just agree with that. And personally, one council member, I think this is a very important issue to us, and everything's costing. There's no doubt about that. But I think this is something that is important to us, and I would support the full amount the first year, full increase.
Any others?
Yeah, Craig, I really appreciate you coming out and taking the time to talk to us. And I've I kind of had a similar reaction to the city manager, in that when I first looked at it, I was like, well, you can always break it into, you could break it into two or phase it. I think air quality is different in the sense that it's directly correlated between quality of life, and we have examples not just from our own community in Pierce County but also from around the world of what happens when you don't stay on top of air quality, what that does to the quality of life, not just for children, but for people throughout. And I think it's not cheap. It's a problem that needs to be addressed and takes money to be addressed. And the request per capita, if you look at the return, you'd say, would everybody in this community get 25 cents worth of value for this work, the work that you're continuing to do on clean air? And I would support it. I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it is more expensive, but I would support this increase at this time in one phase.
Any others? Comments? Councilmember Agnew.
I too would be in support of this. I, like yourself, thought a step would be in order initially, but this isn't just for us. This is for our kids. So I'd definitely be in favor of this, and I will support it.
Any others? Councilmember Sandberg.
I'm in favor of going with the one-step increase. I mean, it's not a huge budget impact for Bothell. I'm sure there are other SCA communities that are going to argue louder.
Councilmember Rayum.
All right, I've got the majority vote. I know what to say tomorrow. I also too fully support the full increase. So I do appreciate all the work you guys do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for the time.
And I, for the record, I do also support moving forward. So you have full support of the council present.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
All right, thank you. All right, moving right along, we will now go to AB 1473 to consider approval of necessary for North Shore School District easements for Horse Creek improvements. And we have Ronnie Bennett presenting tonight.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, members of council. Again, I'm Ronnie Bennett, Senior Civil Engineer with the Public Works Department, and I'm here tonight to ask you to authorize City Manager to execute agreements with the North Shore School District for the construction of the Horse Creek Improvements Project. We do have a location map for reference. And I've circled two areas on the map. As you can see, the larger one is the open channel part of the creek, and then between the large circle and the small, ellipse, is another section of the creek that will run parallel to 188th before joining the existing Horse Creek, which currently runs in a pipe underneath the Pop Keeney Stadium. Also, be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. On page 41 of our agenda packet, it talks about the possibility of additional compensation for the easement area. So I think the amount for this easement that we are accepting in a deferred amount in the event that they have some stormwater charges in the future is about $75,000.
Yes, that's correct.
So then on page 41, it says there is the potential for additional compensation for the easement area if there is a reduction in parking. On page 41, the top paragraph. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Do we know, like, I guess I would have expected that we would know at the outset with the construction work going on whether parking would be impacted. And are we talking about an amount that would be comparable to what's proposed before us?
My understanding from negotiations when we met with the school district was that was their biggest concern, was their parking and their flow through with buses on game nights and things like that. And in the future, if there was any chance in the future that their parking would be reduced, they wanted that in there as an opportunity to reevaluate the situation at that point.
So does this plan here reduce parking for them?
No, it does not.
But then there's the potential. Why would there be the potential in the future to reduce parking for them? I guess I'm just concerned that there's this,
Councilmember Sandberg, would you yield for a moment?
Sure.
So, as I understand it, and perhaps Ronnie, you can correct me if I'm incorrect, it says if grantee changes its code such that the stream buffer from the Horse Creek is increased from what it is today, we would have to act as a council to change our code to take away parking that they currently use. So we know what the project is now. We know what our current code is. This would require an active council in the future to change our code to increase that buffer to take away their parking. And presumably, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff would advise us by doing this, you are invoking this provision and you're going to be, if you increase this buffer, you're going to be costing the city money by doing that. Correct. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. That's all I have.
Okay. Any others with questions? Councilmember Evans.
So, Ronnie, the map that is good, but I was wondering about the maps on page 37 and 38. I think it's two maps. There's a match line. So I'm looking at the first one on page 37, which essentially shows, it looks like the channel going down on the east property line of the school district property. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then at the southeast corner, it widens a little bit at that point.
It does, yes.
So that's where we're actually talking about constructing the channel is in that area there.
In that hatched area, and
Yeah.
it shows the portion of the channel that will be on the district's property.
Okay.
It'll kind of straddle the property line, if you will.
And then the one on the next page, is that where you mentioned that Horse Creek crosses to the south side of the road? And it looks like there's more hashed area on the north end there. What's the difference there?
It's actually the same situation. The Horse Creek basically turns to the west, goes in a culvert underneath the driveway, then opens up a little bit before going under 188th Street. Okay. So basically the hatched area is the creek channel area as well.
So will we be taking away that much property from them on that north boundary there?
We will.
The larger? Okay.
Yes.
And I was just interested in the staff report here. In that second paragraph, it makes a comment that there would be no immediate transfer of funds. Compensation takes the form of a credit of $76,500 if North Shore School District incurs the stormwater facility charge. So what triggers when and if they would have a stormwater facility charge?
The fact that if they ever determined they wanted to redevelop the property,
Okay.
that permit would go through a review process, and at that point, it would be determined if they have a facility charge or not.
So at this point, just on their current design, they're not going to be assessed a charge at this point, the way we have it outlined, the channel and things.
That's correct.
And so the 76,500 is if there was a charge. So there's really no cash exchange here. There's a credit, so to be, but only if they call on the credit at some point in the future.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any others? Councilman Ray.
So is it unique that we do a swap for a utility fee or an impact fee for an easement?
I'm not sure, Councilmember Ream. I don't know the answer to that.
I would say it's not common. Typically, people want to have if we're buying property or if we're buying an easement, they will want compensation for that. In this case, we found an arrangement that worked for both parties.
Okay. That was my only question. Thanks.
Right. Councilmember Lamb.
So I just had one question. I understand that this was something of a gating item for the work on Horse Creek. Is that correct? That before we could go forward with this, we obviously needed this easement.
That's correct.
And so what does this do to the entire, and this is a little bit beyond the scope of this contract, but it's related to Horse Creek. What does this do to our calendar now? With this secured, if we approve this, what do we expect to happen on Horse Creek, or what can we do once this is approved that we couldn't do before it was approved?
Currently, we're planning to recommend award to council next week at
Okay.
the regular meeting, and our proposed schedule would be after that to be able to execute the contracts and actually begin the work just after 4th of July of this year. And maintaining that schedule, we could make our construction schedule to abandon the pipe from its current location in July of 2016, which would be our 2-year work window to get the creek moved.
Okay. If there aren't additional questions, I would move to recommended action.
All right. Well, we've got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor of to authorize the city manager to enter into a professional services agreement with, wrong one. Got ahead of myself. Consider approval of North Shore School District easements for both sanitary sewer and Horse Creek systems. Yes.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
So what comes back to us next week, this is approving this action, is do we still need to approve the easements at the next meeting, or that's what this did? So there will be this item will not be on next week's agenda then. It's done.
That's correct.
Great.
The award for the actual construction
Yeah.
contract is proposed for next week.
Great.
Right, thank you, Ronnie. Right, next up, we have AB 14-74. And it's consider approval of professional services agreement with Pace Engineers for Storm and Surface Water Master Plan. And we have Don Feen with our presentation today.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and council members. Don Feen, Utility and Development Services Manager. And I'd like to introduce you tonight to the new supervisor for the Stormwater Group. His name is Craig Stamfer, and he has a considerable amount of municipal experience previously with Seattle and also with the Port of Anacortes and also with Mill Creek, where he worked with Bob Stowe, our city manager. So he will be giving the presentation, and that, here's Craig.
Thanks, Don. It's been a while since I've been in front of a council, so I hope it'll go smoothly. And I appreciate you listening to us on the commencement of our Storm and Surface Water Master Plan, and we're commencing that tonight with a request to you to authorize a professional services contract with Pace Engineers. And representing Pace here tonight is Ken Nelson, if you have any specific questions you might want to ask of him. So jumping right into it, my presentation tonight, I've got a fairly short outline. I'm going to provide a background on why we're here tonight, the desired outcomes of the storm and surface water plan, some of the key elements, 8 of the key elements of the plan, and the roles of staff and the consultant on those. Then I'll go into some contract details, and then finally provide you with what we're asking you to do specifically tonight. So a little bit of background. I'm going to start with a timeline here starting in 1994, and I'll explain why in a minute. 1999 is also a key date to remember, and here we are in 2014. In 94, we adopted the first Bothell Comprehensive Stormwater Master Plan. It is also the current Stormwater Master Plan. So it's 20 years old, and a lot has happened since that time. We've had the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System regulations introduced in '99, and we've gone now through 2 permit cycles with this permitting requirement. And increasingly, these permits are getting more and more complex and causing us to do more and more in our stormwater arena and now into watersheds as well. And speaking of watersheds, we had the Endangered Species Act listing starting in '99 with the proposed listing of the Puget Sound Chinook and then subsequent listings. And this has also caused us to focus more on our watersheds and stormwater management. Also in 2007, you recall we had some city flooding events that highlighted some of the infrastructure requirements that we have in stormwater. Throughout all this time, and it's probably a little low for you to see there, but we've had evolving stormwater design standards, and it really gone from what we used to take kind of a snapshot in 1994 of a storm event and sort of model it through our system to the rivers. Now we're doing this multi-event models looking backwards many decades, and in the future this is going to evolve into addressing things like climate changes and things like that. So this is getting more and more complex. And now we have city growth on top of that, which has added systems and complexity to what we manage. So all of that points to the need for a new plan, and this is a good time to do that with the second round of the permitting with NPDES. So the desired outcomes of the plan, and I've identified 4 here that I'm going to go over with you. The first one is a roadmap for regulatory compliance. And this is going to provide us with improved predictability both for our staff and for our ratepayers. It's going to limit our liability, and it's also going to kind of enhance our opportunity for funding by being compliant with the current regulations. A second desired outcome of the plan is up-to-date watershed assessments. And I want to be clear here, we're not talking about comprehensive watershed planning. That is a huge effort and a very expensive effort. However, we are going to target key watershed issues here. We're going to use this to inform the public and funding agencies of the needs we have in our watersheds. And this is going to guide both the development in our watersheds as well as any sort of restoration measures we can take within our program. A third key element of our outcome of the plan is a prioritized capital investment program. This will allow us to support the best use of our staff time and our limited utility funds in a way that will enhance public relations by solving problems in a priority fashion and being able to communicate that with our public. And we can also use this as a way to focus on economic development. I anticipate as part of our capital prioritization process, we'll use benefit cost analysis sort of evaluations of our projects as we go through. Then the fourth key outcome or desired outcome of this plan is a unified program document. You've probably seen we have multiple and diverse efforts associated with stormwater and watershed planning and actions. This is going to allow us to target and track and coordinate and communicate those program priorities. So in short, this is a comprehensive guide to our program, our stormwater and surface water program. If you just take a look at all the various plans and activities we have, and this is just a partial showing of them. We have so many different activities that we do in the stormwater arena right now. We're going to take that and we're going to put that into the umbrella, if you will, pardon the pun, of the stormwater and surface water program. And that is, we envision this as a comprehensive linked plan document. And by document, I don't just mean a binder that's going to be put on the shelf. This is going to be a live, electronic-based document with linkages to these other plans that will be useful not just to us, but to all of our stakeholders. So I have 8 key elements in the plan and the roles, and I'm going to start with the first 4. Program overview, these are on the left-hand side. Program overview, regulatory and policy framework, structure, functions, and relationships of our utilities, both internal and external, and then watershed assessments. On these first 4, the consultant is going to play a fairly strong role in the watershed assessments arena in helping us do those find those key watershed elements, and also in the gap analysis and evaluation of our regulatory environment and helping us develop that roadmap for our regulatory compliance. On the next 4 key plan elements, we have capital needs, land development, public outreach and interaction, and financial, including our rates and our rate path. In these elements, the consultant is going to again play a strong role in helping us compile and define our projects and our capital program, including preliminary engineering and cost estimates, and help us with our prioritization efforts. You can see here that staff has a significant role in almost all of these elements, and we're going to be writing and developing a lot of this plan. But we are going to rely upon the consultant for expertise, for capacity, and for an external perspective, which I think has a lot of value when we develop a plan like this, that they're looking at our plan with not just the perspectives that we have internally, but what other agencies are doing and sort of where we are in the region as well. So just a quick slide on plan development. We understand this is a very public process that affects the many stakeholders throughout the city. So we're going to actively engage these stakeholders, the public and the policymakers in this process, not just the beginning and the end, but throughout the whole process. We're going to strategically use the tools that are available now, including the web. We'll use social media. We'll use the newsletters and flyers and other publications the city has, and we'll develop others as well as necessary, including appropriate public meetings. I can't tell you exactly what the details of this public outreach and engagement plan are going to look like now, because that is one of the first elements that we'll be tackling with the development of this plan. So you will be seeing that fairly soon and understanding and seeing where you can participate in that process as well. We understand, obviously, that stakeholder engagement is a key to this successful plan, and really I intend to be very strategic about this. I think this is very important. Just some of the contract details very quickly. The Pace Herrera team was selected from 3 firms that submitted on this, and we used a qualifications-based selection. And then once selecting them, negotiated a contract and fee. The contract amount that we have here is $125,000. It was originally $175,000. The staff has brought that down because we're going to do a lot of this work in-house, and we think that's appropriate. And the schedule on this is about a 12-month project. We expect to be I'll back to you in numerous points along the way, but in about a year, we expect to have a plan in front of you for adoption. There is $175,000 available in the 13-14 budget, fully available, but we're obviously using $125,000 of this for the consultant fees. So the final slide is the recommendation for council action. We ask that you authorize the city manager to sign a professional services contract with Pace Engineers, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Any questions from council? Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Lamb.
Thanks for the presentation. I know we have one council member who has a very extensive background in stormwater, and I'd be interested in hearing, I don't have any questions myself, but I'd be very interested in hearing the questions that Councilmember Rayom has, if he has any.
Any others? Councilmember Rayom? Yeah, I mean, that was a great segue, right?
Let me take it over here. So I sent some questions ahead of time. I don't know if you guys got a chance to check your email, but I turned those in. I think an important part about I'm glad that Pace and Herrera, the selected firm, they should do a great job. I've done this. I did this for 5 years. It took me 5 years to create a plan like this. But one of the differences and an important thing I hope that we consider is making sure that we, in the plan, it's not about just meet the regulations, but get to the intent and try to find, it's one thing to like, just don't let anything get worse. It's another thing to try to be strategic about, hey, well, let's have a couple of healthy streams in the city. And like, how are we going to do that? And if you do that, I can guarantee you'll pull down federal and state funds into the city way more than just your own funding with your own utility rate. So it's not really it's more of a preach session than a question. But yeah, I support the contract. I checked it thoroughly, obviously, and it looks good. So
Well,
that's all I
thank
have.
you.
There's more questions.
Councilmember Sandberg.
So on page 79 of the agenda packet, it was in the scope of work, it said the top 40 flooding problems in the city would be mapped and the top 6 flooding problems would receive additional engineering analysis. And so that got me thinking, well, if we have a top 40, how long is the actual list? And because 40 flooding problems sounds kind of intimidating to me. So I was wondering if you have an idea about how many other are on the list besides the top 40.
My understanding is that number was put in there as a guide for the consultant to manage the expectations. And as to the actual, are there 40 and are there 6, I've actually questioned that same thing, and I've asked them to move that to the assumptions section of that scope so that it clarifies that they're going to identify the top ones. Don may be able to speak to that number a little better, though.
There were quite a few singled out during the 2007 flood mitigation project. I think there might have been over 40, but the degree of the flooding may have varied, considerably amongst all those 40. There's, that was a huge event, that December 2007 event. It was considered greater than 100 years. Of course, how many greater than 100 years are we going to have? But I believe there were over 40 just of areas of flooding, and some of those have already been solved. Some of them, turned out to be pretty small, or maybe they were private in nature and that kind of thing. But
So it's not like we're looking at a list of 100 and we're going to look at be most concerned about the top 40.
Right. Well, what we want to do is prioritize things. I think similar to what Andy Riem has said about watersheds, you want to prioritize these based on these capital projects, based on the significance as far as impacts, flooding on roads and things like that, and water quality issues. But there'll be a prioritization elements identified, and then projects will be scored accordingly.
And then the scope of work also assumes that there's not going to be any new information collected. I didn't get the sense that the consultant was going to go out in the field and collect new data. I think that was on page 76.
There will be some, because for one thing, we have annexed a new area, so we're not as familiar with it. So that we'll have some gap analysis in those areas that we haven't studied before as a city, at least. And maybe some of it might be collection from King County, that kind of thing. But there's going to be areas there and problems there that are going to need to be analyzed. And there's also areas that haven't been modeled hydraulically and hydrologically. So there's going to be some of that.
Oh, I just got the sense that it specifically says on one of those pages that the consultant assumes that the city will be providing all the information, and they list out all the historical reports, and then
I think in the watershed assessment analysis, I think it's called watershed assessment section, there is some information regarding modeling and that kind of thing.
So I guess a lead-on question to that is, if money were available, what new information would make this stormwater comprehensive plan even stronger? It seems like we do have some funding available. If we budgeted 175 and we're only spending 125, so to make the plan even stronger, to address what Councilmember Rayum said about not just making sure you don't violate standards, but actually going a step further and making it a great, making great habitat or great systems.
I think some of that will shake out during the plan as we dive deeper into it. But I think one area that you just touched on, the habitat and that kind of thing, maybe we could go stronger in that area. And it may involve, though, working with other divisions like the planning department and things with the critical areas and how you do native growth, how you do green belts and native growth set-asides and things like that, buffers for the creeks and things like that. That's kind of another element that we could go into a little stronger perhaps, and it's but this it would be on a wish list to go deeper into that. And eventually, with the NPDES permit, we do have to look at our whole code and how it meshes with things like low impact development, things like that. And so there might be a segue there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, are there any others? Councilmember Evans.
If there's no other questions, I'd move to authorize the city manager to enter this personal services agreement with Pace in the amount of $125,000.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Evans, second by Councilmember Lamb. Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right. Thank you so much for your presentation. Next up, we have AB 14-75, and we'll hear from City Attorney Joe Beck on this item.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and council members. Also here tonight is Dave Phelps, who is available to answer questions if any questions come out. This is a fairly simple issue that we've dealt with several times recently. This is a study session for to consider adoption of an ordinance regarding a utility franchise agreement with Astound Broadband LLC. We hold a study session because under state law we're required to have two touches on these franchise agreements. But in fact, I consider this to be a fairly simple matter. In Washington, a utility that wishes to locate its facilities within the city right-of-way generally obtains a franchise, which is similar to a master permit from that city. And the franchise sets forth the terms under which those facilities are constructed, operated, relocated, and eventually removed. On October 1st, 2012, we received a formal request from Astound Broadband LLC for a franchise. And Astound would like a franchise in order to operate a fiber optic cable network within the rights-of-way of the city. Astound Broadband owns what was formerly BlackRock Cable, including the fiber cable which is already within the city's right-of-way. The city granted BlackRock Cable a franchise to operate an open video system which is similar to cable services in the rights-of-ways effective January 16, 2001. That ordinance has since expired and there is no existing franchise. But the facilities obviously are still there. This is a separate telecommunications franchise, different than a cable franchise, and similar to the 4 or 5 other telecommunications franchises that we've recently reviewed and adopted. And it would permit Astound to maintain the facilities that currently exist in the city's right-of-way and to build out the facilities as is necessary to continue to serve the customers in the city. Astound will, in conjunction with several different affiliates, provide voice and data services as well as dark and lit fiber services to businesses and institutional customers within the city. They do not currently have residential customers. If Astound were to decide to expand their system, which they potentially could do, although they've not stated any plans currently to do that, they would be required to go through the standard permitting process for their system's expansion, And I would close with by stating that companies like Astound, as I've stated before, which use the city's right-of-way, have the right basically to do that, and subject to the controls that we can put in a franchise agreement and under code. And they're generally allowed to have a franchise with the city. As I said before, no action is requested this evening. However, this item is currently scheduled for council action, I believe, on the June 3rd consent agenda, unless council states a wish to have it come back for discussion.
Great, thank you, Joe. Is there any questions for staff? Councilmember Evans.
Just generally, so there's really very little change or difference in this franchise agreement and then the ones we approved previously.
They're functionally exactly the same. Each one is negotiated separately. So you're dealing with different attorneys and contract administrators, so there's minor tweaks in each and every one. And every system is a little bit different in different places, and such as this system has some aerial facilities, which the ones we've done recently have not had any existing aerial. They've all been underground. This one's partially aerial, partially underground. So we had to write the franchise to deal with the aerial parts of their facilities. But functionally, it's the same thing.
If there's no question, I'd recommend it go on the consent agenda as recommended.
Councilmember Sandberg.
I had the same question that Councilmember Evans has. My eyes kind of glaze over when I see these franchise agreements, so I just want to know if there's anything different than what we did the last time. But there's a map on page 93,
Yes.
and it has blue or red and brown lines, blue and brown lines.
Yeah.
Is that, so all the lines are their facilities?
The blue and the orange or orange or red, are their facilities. Blue simply denotes the aerial lines, and the orange is the underground. There is also some green. Those are customers of that actually own the green facilities themselves, apparently. That's what I'm told by Astound. And those green facilities are I assume, tie into Astound's facilities. So, and that's you would expect to see that to some degree when you're dealing with lit and unlit fiber, because you'll have your own a company would have its own facilities tying in and using some of the Astound facilities capacity in an unlit situation.
That's all.
Any others? Is everybody in concurrence with Councilmember Evans on bringing this back on consent? There we go.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joe. All right, moving right along. Next up, AB 1476, a study session to consider a planning commission recommendation regarding proposed miscellaneous downtown code amendments. And we have Dave Boyd presenting for us tonight. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, and good evening. There we go. So tonight I'm bringing to you a set of miscellaneous downtown code amendments that were initiated by council in 2013. Planning Commission held a study session in November of that year, and public hearing on 3 sessions in November and December. The 4 issues under consideration are to revisit allowed uses in the neighborhood center overlays, or NCOs, to modify regulations to remove impediments to sidewalk cafes and other appropriate sidewalk uses, to clarify the kinds of parking reductions available to downtown developments in the central downtown districts for green, particularly for green buildings. And fourth, to adjust the requirements that windows have a 3-inch inset from the face of cladding to the face of glazing. So just to quickly go through these, each issue here. The NCO uses, there's two neighborhood center overlays in the city. The one that brought our attention to this issue is the one up flanking 191st in the northwest part of the downtown sub-area, where we discovered that there had been some businesses that had moved into that center with minor tenant improvements. Didn't have to go through any planning review, but they happened to be uses that were not actually allowed. As we looked closer, we found that there were other existing uses, some longstanding existing uses that weren't technically allowed by the new downtown plan use tables. So we realized that there was a need to take a closer look at those tables. The other neighborhood center overlay, as we got into this, we realized this would also apply to the overlay in the northeast section of the downtown sub-area, the area at the end of Beardsley, where the village at Beardsley Crossing is going up, which raised some other issues that we Planning Commission and staff grappled with in this code amendment. The uses in neighborhood center overlays, you start with the underlying zoning, which is general downtown corridor, and this table in the district requirements that sets up the broad categories of uses that are allowed. So in the neighborhood center or in the general downtown corridor, neighborhood center retail is allowed in the NCOs, business and personal services are allowed, and civic and cultural office uses are allowed. In pedestrian-oriented retail is not allowed because we're trying to focus that in the downtown core. So the neighborhood center overlays are listed here in the fine print on the left here, and in the gray are, and those include some size limitations. The provisions in the gray provide a provisional increase in those in certain cases at the discretion of the director. So that's the current the code. And then moving on to the use tables, and specifically for NCO uses, what I've done here is I've shown some of the uses that were allowed under the previous zoning, particularly neighborhood business zoning in the case of the northwest neighborhood center overlay, and commercial business or community business in the north east. And then, so when you look at what uses are allowed in this neighborhood center overlay, you look at the business and personal services column and the neighborhood center retail column, and in both of those. So any use that's allowed in either one of those is allowed. But there are a number of uses that were allowed previously that no longer are. And again, primarily that's to focus the kind of pedestrian-oriented retail uses into the central downtown districts. So the the proposed changes are to address certain uses to make them allowed outright. Appliance and electronic stores, we'll see in subsequent slides that we do have those in the neighborhood center overlay. Discount stores, secondhand stores, there are a number of those in those overlays. And then we also addressed auto supply stores, which aren't there in the overlay currently, but there was an auto supply store that was displaced recently and might have had a home, or that kind of use may be appropriate in the neighborhood center overlay, especially considering that there are a number of gas stations in the one in the northwest corner. So here are just some images of those uses and the changes in terms of the neighborhood center uses. We are, for some reason, the provisional expansion of businesses or the size limits didn't apply to eating and drinking establishments. And there are some eating and drinking establishments in the existing neighborhood center overlay. This restaurant that's now Pasión Tequila is right at the size limit. There are restaurants going into the village at Beardsley Crossing that will be over the size limit. So we thought it was appropriate to provide an avenue for those businesses to continue and potentially expand through this provisional size requirement. And the big change that we made after some deliberations was that we decided that in both cases that it was appropriate to allow changes of use that were consistent with the previous zoning in those centers were developed under. And in the case of the village at Beardsley Crossing, that is not being developed under the downtown plan. We did provide a provision where that and other developments that were in the planning pipeline at the time of downtown plan adoption could continue to develop under the previous zoning, which they did. So we thought it was appropriate that they that in the case of just changes of uses, tenant improvements within those, that those should be allowed that were consistent with the zoning under which they were developed. And then if there's significant redevelopment that meets the thresholds for downtown plan compliance, then they would have to comply fully with the downtown plan use provisions. Next issue has to do with sidewalk use permitting. The downtown plan encourages sidewalk cafes, and specifically it allows makes specific allowance for sidewalk cafes and merchant displays in the sidewalk. But our current code in Chapter 1720 is somewhat limited in allowing for those sorts of things. It has a 30-day limit for the permits, and which is not conducive to an ongoing business restaurant with sidewalk cafe, and also would require significant staff resources to continually renew those. And then there's some inconsistencies. The downtown plan calls for a minimum 5 foot of unobstructed sidewalk space. Chapter 1720 requires minimum of 3 feet, but ADA would require 44 inches. So we wanted to bring some consistency to the regulations here. As we got into that, there was actually quite a bit of discussion about this, and there was a request to look at other jurisdictions. So these are some images from Kirkland that actually has a 6 foot requirement, but in certain cases they allow that to be reduced to 5 feet. Different jurisdictions have or most jurisdictions have design standards in addition to the regulations, and the recommendation from the Planning Commission was to keep the regulations fairly simple and clean, and develop more detailed guidelines in new design standards along with fee structure. More examples from both Kirkland and Ballard, sidewalk cafes, quite a variety, and in Bothell. So a couple of questions that came up were some jurisdictions require a permit and fees for sidewalk cafes that due to the state liquor board requirement have to have barriers around them, but other if they just are setting tables out and not providing table service, they don't provide a fee. And after consulting with Public Works and legal staff, the Planning Commission recommendation was to require permits and insurance for all private uses in public areas, but to structure the fees to be minimal for non-exclusive uses that provide a public benefit, and higher fees for exclusive uses. And then there was a fair amount of discussion about that requirement, whether it should be 5 feet or 44 inches. The project manager from Six Oaks made a strong case for 44 inches, in part because that development along the boulevard, in the design of the boulevard, there was a an adjustment that had to be made, increasing some of the proposed lane widths, which took away from sidewalk width and does, in fact, limit the area available for sidewalk cafes. But this is an illustration that I did showing that there still is what we felt was ample area for sidewalk cafes that still allows the 5-foot clear walkway around, and raised a number of questions that may still need to be answered within the design guidelines, like whether you allow pop-outs in between obstructions like tree grates or tree pits that would force a pedestrian to meander around those. So the Planning Commission felt strongly that the 5-foot minimum should stand, and that more detailed regulations could be developed as part of the design standards. Third issue was parking reductions in the central downtown districts. About the same time that the downtown plan was adopted, there were some amendments to allow parking reductions for green buildings, and that didn't really get incorporated into the downtown plan, or the downtown plan provisions didn't get reflected in that code amendment. We've since, through director's interpretation, allowed this. We thought it was only fair to allow a green building in the downtown district to get the same, have the same ability for parking reductions for green buildings as anywhere else in the city. But they were tied to the transit reductions, which are already calculated into the downtown plan parking requirements. So we need to find a cleaner way to separate those two. And that's essentially what we did. We rewrote that to state up front what the transit reductions are, and that those don't apply to the central downtown districts, and then made it clear the relatively small incremental reduction that's available for green buildings. And it's good to note that this will also apply to the general downtown corridor table that was recently adopted, a similar table to the ones that are used in the central downtown districts. And then finally, the window glazing inset requirement. The architectural elements regulations in the downtown plan call for this 3-inch inset from the pane of glass to the face of the exterior walls. And the intent is to provide relief to the facade to ensure that the new buildings have a quality appearance and don't have a cheap, flat look to them, while still providing opportunity for design creativity. Almost immediately, we got pushback from developers who made the case that the currently commercially available window profiles made it very difficult and expensive and potentially problematic in terms of water infiltration to provide that kind of inset on all types of with all types of cladding. It's quite easy to do with masonry cladding, but not as easy to do with other wood cladding panels and siding. So the recommendation was to reduce the required inset to 1.5 inches to match commonly available window profiles, and then adding a guideline encouraging insets that average 3 inches. And in some of the existing developments, again, we made an interpretation that a development that provided an average of 3-inch could go forward, as you see in the photo on the lower right of the 104, and similarly, the Six Oaks project went through a similar analysis. And Planning Commission did ask that we look into this claim about the lack of available profiles providing more than 1.5 inches, and we did. And this is a very common. In fact, this is one of the more generous insets that you'll find, right at 1.5 inches. And then here you see a bunch of, a number of details from the Six Oaks project that show a variety of insets from 1.5 inches with panelized siding to 4.5 inches with masonry siding. So we thought that was an appropriate. Again, this image of the 104 shows the variety of insets. So next steps. I don't believe there's any public testimony and not required for a study session anyway. We ask that council do any deliberation and provide any direction to staff on the proposed amendments, and then direct staff to prepare council findings, conclusions, and action, and a proposed ordinance for consideration at a future meeting, and then direction on whether you'd like us to bring that back for a hearing or on consent would be appreciated.
Great, thank you, Dave. Are there any questions of staff? Councilmember Sandberg.
I'm still confused about the parking requirements. If someone is developing in the downtown sub area, they get the reduction from transit plus they can apply a green building reduction?
That's correct, and that's the same for any development throughout the city. The regulation, the first reduction was in place for transit and for any development that had good transit service, which is defined as 10 runs within a 2-hour period during the morning and evening peak commutes. So that's available to all uses except for those central downtown districts where we've basically calculated that into the base requirement. And then when we added the reduction for green building, that was an incremental further reduction added onto those transit reductions.
So you're saying that if you're outside the downtown, you can apply for a transit reduction for parking and a green building reduction for parking.
Correct.
And that same ability does not apply currently in the downtown area. So you're just making it equitable.
Yeah, it doesn't apply explicitly in the code. We've interpreted the intent of that as and allowed that use, but we thought it was important to make that explicit in the code and make it much clearer, because when we actually had to apply it, it was not clear at all. It was pretty muddy how you would make that incremental reduction.
Are parking requirements in the downtown area lower than parking requirements outside? I mean,
the base requirement is lower
Lower.
because we did factor in the transit reduction essentially, and then we changed the requirement for residential from a per unit to a per bedroom requirement.
so you don't think that we would create a situation where we would underpark for transit and green building credits in the downtown?
No more than we would anywhere else. And it's not just, it's not throughout the downtown. It's those central districts plus now the general downtown corridor.
Okay. On page 153 of the agenda packet, on item number 1, I think some of my confusion was just when I read that sentence, I wasn't quite sure what it meant. I think because it's like a bullet, it reads kind of like a sentence fragment. So is that supposed to mean, so for land uses of the type described in subsection A of this section, a decrease in parking can be, or a 4% decrease in parking can be realized for each run, up to a maximum of 40% decrease in parking requirement? I don't know if maybe you can reword that those, because it's the same thing for the lead statement for 1 and 2. Instead of
Correct.
making them full sentences as opposed to sentence fragments?
Not quite following you, but the reference to the types of uses in subsection A, those are basically referring to commercial uses, that basically the employee generating uses that are using transit. So
I guess when I read that first sentence, it's a fragment. To me. And I think it would be a lot clearer if it's the lead statement in each of those sections, section 1 and 2, that those were converted into a complete sentence.
And I think that could be done by just inserting after the comma a reduction of 4% for each run to a maximum of 40% would be allowed.
Yeah, something like that. That's just an easy change like that. And then changing to one of your other, one of the other changes. So that was parking. Oh, so do you have an example of what would be the floor of a parking requirement? So if a development came in and they had transit reductions and green building reductions and they were able to reduce up to a maximum of 40%, are you able to give us a concrete example of what that would mean in terms of reduced parking spaces? Probably not right now off the top of your head, but when this comes back.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, okay. And then, so moving on to the 5 feet minimum for the sidewalk clearance, that was for both restaurant uses and for merchant displays, I think is what the language is. And so what is a merchant display defined?
It's not, but it would apply to sidewalk sales, like you might see outside of Paul Richards Clothing frequently, or even decorative items that several businesses. Hana Sushi has some decorative items, private planters and benches and that sort of thing.
Because these can be ongoing uses that can go year round.
Correct.
And then it says later on, this is on page 151, that the ability for somebody to continually use that public space, that permit could be revoked in the event if such a thing, such a display or such a use became dangerous, but not necessarily anything else. Like there were no other criteria. Like I don't really know. I mean, to me, it seemed like merchant display could be anything. And then I thought, well, would the city, if they have if they've gotten a permit to do a year-round display potentially, would the city want to only have the ability to revoke that permit if it became dangerous or in any other situation, like a nuisance? And then it's difficult to define what a nuisance is. But it seems like the permit would only be revoked in the situation that use of that public space was dangerous.
Yeah, and that was the concern, that we would have that ability to address any public safety issues. The other issue really didn't come up in the Planning Commission's deliberations.
Okay. And so your drawing of a potential outdoor seating arrangement for the Six Oaks restaurant you said you were able to achieve 5 feet? Because it seems like that public testimony from that individual was clearly asking for something less than 5 feet.
Yeah.
And so did that individual feel as though this had addressed their concerns or not?
No, they still wanted to go with the reduction to 44 inches, but Planning Commission and staff were unanimous that 5 feet is. It's really a balancing. We do want to encourage sidewalk cafes, and in some cases they might be limited. You might not be able to do larger tables in the sidewalk cafes because of those limitations. But we also want to create a good pedestrian environment and have enough room for at least a couple to walk side by side.
And then are there you said that there were going to be negligible or minimal fees associated with the public use permit. Is that something that fee structure will come at a later date?
Yeah, that will be developed as part of the along with the design standards. And so the recommendation was that more permanent uses of sidewalks or more exclusive uses of sidewalk space, like a sidewalk cafe with a fixed railing, would have to pay more of a more market rate for that area. It would be based on a square foot area, whereas a coffee shop that just put tables out for without table service and allowed pretty much anyone to come and use those would have a fairly minimal fee, if any. But the recommendation was that a permit should be required, and some sort of permit processing fee would be required, even for those types of uses.
Councilmember Sandberg, do you have any more questions? We've budgeted 50 minutes on this topic, and you're at about 11 minutes of questions so far.
I will yield the floor to someone else who has questions.
Is there any other questions? This one.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lamb.
Dave, thanks very much for your presentation on the work. I know this is pretty detailed stuff, and I appreciate your attention to those details. I had a couple questions on the neighborhood center overlay use regulations, and I apologize if this is going over things that you have already said, but I just kind of wanted to get clarity on a couple items. The restaurant provision, is it now something in that use would be allowed to be over 2,500 square feet? Is that correct?
In the they would be allowed to exceed 2,500 square feet provisionally, which would be it'd be an administrative process with director approval. So they'd have to make some sort of justification for that. Kind of from a public, keeping it up at like the 35,000 foot level, what would be our generalized objection to having a restaurant larger than 2,500 square feet in, let's say, like if the Rite Aid mall were to redevelop into a restaurant, what would be our policy objective for not having that? Well, the downtown plan strategic actions, which basically are the comprehensive plan policies for the downtown sub-area, does talk about reserving precious uses for the central downtown core to make that the true heart of the commercial area, and so that's the basic underlying reason for that.
And so then contrasting the Beardsley development with the existing sort of QFC Rite Aid development that's there, Beardsley, we're saying, was developed under a different set of codes, and so as it's being constructed with all of their intended uses, this will not impact them, or if they were to at a later time redevelop it, these changes would impact them.
Well, basically, what we've done with these amendments is provide them the opportunity to operate within their development and have changes of uses, even basically as long as they're consistent with the zoning that was in place when they developed. I think it's unlikely that they will redevelop to an extent that would exceed the thresholds of the downtown plan, which would trigger full compliance. But
and then for the QFC Rite Aid block, if they do redevelop, so we're trying to say essentially businesses that are currently there by this change are allowed to continue to be there and sort of modestly expand if they need to.
Correct.
But if the entire area were to redevelop, then it would have to come into conformance with this code. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. On the sidewalk cafes issue, was there any talk of kind of coming somewhere in the middle of 40? Because I certainly understand 44 is pretty tight. I also understand from Six Oaks that, you know, they feel like that the full 5 is too large. Was there any talk of kind of meeting in the middle of that, or is it just that you said the staff and the Planning Commission was pretty unanimous about not wanting to go lower than 5 feet?
We discussed some provisions. For example, there was some discussion about allowing limited number of intrusions into that 5 feet, especially where you have street furnishings that make it difficult. But in the end, Planning Commission didn't see a compelling reason to do that as part of the code, at least. That's potentially something that we could do in terms of the design standards. There was also talk about going the other way of not only requiring the 5 feet clear, but making that 5 feet continuous so that you didn't have to do a slalom around pop-outs in the sidewalk cafe. They again chose not to make the regulations that specific, but to address, have staff address that in the design standards.
Okay. Thank you. And then finally, going to, I think it's the table, the use category charts accepted on retail. What, and this is going back a ways. This is not actually a proposed change, but as I was looking through it, as I was reviewing my packet, there's a number of services use that are listed in that, and then 4 down, it says that legal services are not allowed to be larger than 2,500 square feet. And I understand most people are crazy about lawyers, but in defense of Joe and myself, I just wanted to know, what was the, other than sort of a general animosity towards the legal profession, what was the rationale behind the 2,500 square feet limitation, as opposed to like a travel agency or real estate services?
Well, that was a provision that really didn't get a lot of attention, and
for the aforementioned reasons, probably.
The general idea, though, is that that's more of an office use that at least on the street front shouldn't be taking up large areas of street frontage.
Okay.
But as an office use on an upper floor, then I don't think that we would hold that 2,500 square foot provision.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Any other questions? Councilmember Evans.
So regarding tree wells and grates, what was the basis of the tree wells initially? Why did we have those in there? I mean, it seems like grates are certainly more pedestrian friendly and adds to some of the space of the 44 inches or the 5 feet, whatever the case may be. It just opens up more.
Yeah.
What was the background behind that?
Well, the Multi-Way Boulevard and Crossroads projects together went through a pretty extensive design process, interdepartmental design process. And at the time, the sidewalk widths were a 1.5 feet wider, and the decision to go with tree wells, and these tree wells will have plantings. Well, they already have plantings, but eventually the plan is for them to have low decorative railings around those to protect those plantings. That was just part of the overall look that the consultant proposed for that street, and that we decided to move forward with. It's something that the Planning Commission recommended. Their findings included a recommendation that staff look at the possibility of what would be involved in making that change. And I think what we've heard from the Capital Projects Group is that we'd really have to kind of revisit reconvene that committee that made those design decisions and take another look at that. But it's possible in the long run that if that proves to be a significant impediment, that could be revisited at some point. But it was part of just the overall design concept.
So you state in your staff report, changing to tree grates would require reopening the process. That's the process
Yeah.
you're talking about, but could be considered if council would like to direct such staff to do so. The tree wells, my experience with them, they're a maintenance issue, collection point for various things, and you've got this nice little railing up around there. It's a great trip hazard, for people walking there. So I really think that I think there should be consideration for tree grates. I think feels like it opens up the area more, and I think there's a lot of reasons, maintenance-wise, safety-wise, all those things that add to those. And I think the actual condition of the tree, I don't know which it does better and which, but certainly they do survive it in the tree grates if they're correctly installed. So I think that's an item that I guess I would be interested in seeing, if necessary, the council reconsider that or the committee look at that again. The public use area permits, that process has not, I think somebody meant, has that process been defined yet of what's involved in permits for that public use area?
I think we still need to do some work on exactly how those are going to be processed, but the code already requires public area use permits for any use of the public right-of-way. We just have it hasn't been an issue, and it's
Okay.
and we haven't really enforced it fully. But as we took a closer look at this, we realized that we did need to tighten up our procedures on that.
So if the sun comes out one day and they want to pull the tables out front, do they get a temporary permit, or how does that process are going to work? Or maybe that'll come back to us at some, or it sounds like you already have a process for that, but.
Well, we're starting to go through that process with Six Oaks, and there they do want to put a railing. They're going to be serving alcohol, so they'll be required to do a railing there. So there will. Those are the instances where we really need a somewhat rigorous process to make sure that it's safe and doesn't damage the brand new sidewalks.
For special events or something on a weekend or something, if
Yeah.
they did that, if there's a temporary use permit on that or whatever.
Technically, they would apply for a short term, and we part of the recommendation is to move away from the fixed requirement that they be done on 30-day increments, and provide a lot more flexibility for that, so they can actually be applied for on a multi-year basis if desired.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, Dave, I just kind of jumping in here, I've got a couple items. I support the tree grates, having seen the other option before. Councilmember Evans is right. It tends to be a collection point for some trash and the maintenance from as far as weeding and things like that. And I've even trying to hustle around some people moving a little slowly, hopping over them and all, where it's, I could have tripped, or I've seen others trip on them. I just, to me, it becomes an impediment on the open space that we're trying to create, and the pedestrian friendliness that we're trying to create. So I'm supportive of the tree grates. And then I just have a concern over permitting for tables on the sidewalk for those uses. I want it to be as simple and as easy as possible for those businesses to do that. And if Councilmember Evans kind of alluded to the fact that it's a Saturday or Sunday and the weather's better than what was expected and they want to put them out there, to be compliant, how do they get their permit on a Saturday or Sunday on the last minute to be able to do that? And I don't want somebody, I don't want a complaint to come back because a business is trying to accommodate extra people by being out there because we weren't able to give them a permit when the weather turned nice all of a sudden for them. I just have a little concern, and maybe you guys have a plan for working through that, but like I say, I just have some concerns that I want to be as user-friendly as possible for those businesses to help them thrive. So other than that, city manager, do we, just kind of a process check here, do we have a exec session tonight?
We do not, Deputy Mayor.
Okay. So we've got about 7 minutes before our scheduled break. Are there, does everybody want to go for a second round, or are we ready to start providing some direction back to staff on this?
I propose that we each have an opportunity to provide what our direction would be to staff.
Okay. Anybody else?
So if I can lead off, I would support this being brought back not on consent, but because I think there's significant business impacts, and I'd like to have an opportunity to hear from business owners what they would have. I share the concern of Councilor Evans and Councilor Spivey about the permitting of tables. I think we want to keep this streamlined as much as possible and not make it onerous, because it's an activity we're trying to encourage. We want this to be in our downtown, so I would be interested in hearing more about that. But I would support this coming back not on consent.
Would you, as a study session item or as a public hearing?
As a public hearing.
All right. Councilmember Ranigo? Councilmember Rio?
I support the same public hearing.
Councilmember Sandberg?
I support the public hearing, and I'd like to also have some more information about how that parking standard would apply with some concrete examples.
Would that be all? Would you be able to do that, Dave?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I could.
And Councilmember Evans?
Yes, I'd like to have this come back. So the question on the tree grades and the tree wells, does that take a different action there, Dave, or are we going to be able to deal with that as it comes back or not?
That's not truly part of the code amendment, but it would be direction, and I'll have to work with Public Works and the capital projects to come up with a. It seems like it'd be good to come back to you with what the cost implications of that. What is it, what would be entailed to at this point to make that switch.
Well, whatever, if we could get more information on that, if we have to deal with it at a later date, but I think that would be interesting to have an additional discussion or design input on that.
And you agree with a public hearing or
Yes.
study session?
Yes.
All right. And I'm also in concurrence with bringing it back as a public hearing. So that being said, and it's 5 minutes to 8, we'll go ahead and council will you have a question?
No, I guess I would just ask, and respectfully, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that we poll the council in terms of moving into the next item, because I'm just sensitive to the fact that we have people who've been waiting who aren't from council
Are
to
we
do that.
still capable of continuing on without the videotape?
Yeah, technologically,
Okay.
yes.
Are we all good with pushing forward then? All right. Well then, thank you, Dave. Is that enough direction for you?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, then we are now moving forward to AB 14-77, a study session regarding solid waste contract and rate structure. And we have Sabrina Combs here presenting for us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Okay. Well, thank you for pushing on. I appreciate that. So what I'm going to be presenting on this evening is the solid waste collection contract and the rates. Council had asked for more information on that, and so we're going to be providing that this evening. So per council direction, we took time after the last council meeting to negotiate the contract and rates with Recology Cleanscapes, Inc. I will be referring to Cleanscapes going forward as Recology Cleanscapes, Inc., because they have officially done that name change. So just so that as you see that, understand that is the purpose for that change. We're keeping the current rate structure across customer classes, as we said that we would. We are keeping Recology Cleanscapes, Inc.'s bottom line with the revenue the same. So that has not changed as part of this negotiation. We determined the administrative fee, and we also made sure that there was a minimal rate impact to customers. And we have provided you in your council packets with the contract and the rates. So, an overview of the new rates. This is just some baseline examples for you. And as you can see, we have identified that we have a 3.58% increase from current 2014 waste management rates. So, for example, a customer with a 35-gallon cart weekly in residential single family who is currently paying $15.73 would be paying $16.29 under these new rate structures. If a customer has a larger cart, say a 64-gallon, they currently pay $31.14. They would go up to a rate of $32.25. Again, these rates we pulled from the highest usage rates, so we looked at the usage in those areas to identify those rates for you so you knew which rates were the ones that customers are using today more frequently. For commercial, there's the 96-gallon cart weekly service, which currently is $53.75, which would go up to $55.67. And then a commercial 2 cubic yard dumpster with one pickup per week is $159.83, which would go up to $165.55. So that is an overview of the rate structure change. So for a comparison, these new rates across other rates in other cities, for the new Recology Cleanscapes rates, this is where Bothell would rank in those in comparison to other cities. Now, these cities are all ranked across their current rates for 2014, but that's the comparable that we have because we don't know the exact rate for the CPI going forward or the rates that they would change for next year for those cities. We are continuing the curbside services that customers experience today, so they will continue to receive their garbage, recycling, and organics with food scraps and yard debris service weekly. They will continue to have the motor oil curbside service, small appliances that they have today, and small electronics and bulky items. Additionally, though, they will have added services for fluorescent tubes and bulbs, used cooking oil, household batteries, plastic bags and film, styrofoam blocks, and small propane cylinders. To put that in perspective, things like batteries and propane cylinders, they are currently taking to the waste mobile, so they're taking a trip to do that. Other items like plastic bags or household batteries or fluorescent bulbs, they were bringing to city facilities to drop off. Now they can do that curbside. Other added services that we've talked to you about are things like the drop-off center customer service Recology Cleanscapes Inc. store that would be available in city limits to customers. That store would also service annexation customers as well, so they would have those available services. There's also the provision of new carts that we have, and cart washing for organics carts one time a year. It sounds very silly to some people, but those carts get smelly in the summer, and having the ability once a year to have that cart taken and cleaned and get a new fresh cart is fantastic. So that is an offering that we have in this contract. We also have streetscapes maintenance service for 8 hours per month for 2 events. So what we like is that helps us with some of our big events like 4th of July, some of those events where we need that extra help. We also have on-call pressure washing service that's available for a fee and on-call snow plowing service if needed. So with that, I want to open it up for any questions.
Well, thank you. Any questions from council?
I do.
Councilmember Lamb.
Hey, Sabrina, thank you very much, and thanks for the work that you've done on this. So, at the last meeting, we had a motion that I supported that didn't pass that said we would continue negotiating with 2 carriers. And as part of that conversation, the current carrier that council has selected said that the rates that we were operating at here in Bothell, or that they were proposing to operate at, were 10% higher than what they operated at in Shoreline. And the proposal that I had supported in advance was to say, let's go back to them and let's explore the idea of whether or not we can bring that down, because they said they built in a 10% cushion into the rates. That's why they were so confident of that. Is that something that we asked Cleanscapes about, or do you feel because that motion failed that you weren't empowered to do that?
Well, with that, we really work to keep the Cleanscapes at their bottom line, Recology Cleanscapes at their bottom line. We didn't want to do any additional analysis with that, and we also wanted to make sure we were keeping within the customer rate class structures we have today. So we actually asked them to do some analysis specific to that, so that we were keeping that structure. And so that's really where that stood from. There was some uncomfortability relating to that gap in the fees and the numbers that were presented, so we wanted to make sure we were staying within the comfortable range that they had provided us. So that's where we stayed.
So the answer is you didn't feel like you did have that authority to go back and say, because there was no additional competition we couldn't ask them to further reduce beyond the 10% that they said they were higher than Shoreline.
Well, council's direction was to stay within the numbers that we had, so we stayed with
No, I know that, yeah, no.
So
that wasn't my motion.
that was
but
really,
no, you're
yeah.
right. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for the record. So the second thing is that garbage rates will be going up in January. One thing that I wanted to explore with Cleanscapes is the idea that, and I'd invite them to answer this, is we kind of presented them on the RFP, and we presented all the carriers with a set menu of what was being offered. There's some great additional services that Cleanscapes are doing that I think are going to be a fantastic amenity to the community. But I'd like to invite them to say, for example, an extra bag service of what they charge for that. If they wouldn't mind tonight saying, like right now, I think we had a set charge for the extra bag if somebody were to leave an extra bag beyond of refuse. If we were to say, look, we're willing to let you have that be a higher rate than what we initially advertised, would that have an impact? Could we bring down residential rates for everybody if we said, look, if you put out an extra bag, that's going to impact the overall rate?
We can let them ask that. I mean, honestly, from a staff perspective, we went through the rates of our current rate structure. We did some analysis across the new rate structure and really fit in and examined where those rates should be to align correctly, as well as making sure that we weren't having an exorbitant increase in rates. Plus, we wanted to make sure that we were doing the same customer class range that we have today. So that's what we stayed within.
No, and so I want to be, because I think maybe you misunderstood my question. I think that the rate structure that you proposed is outstanding. And I think the work that you've done is outstanding. That's not and I'm not proposing to, what I'm asking is when we dig down on that or invite them to say, it might be a policy choice where you'd say, look, because I'm not a garbage hauler, I don't know, and I'm not sure we in the city know because we don't handle the billing for them. It may be that a very, very small percentage of people actually put out an extra bag of garbage. But because of our global rates, we charge them a flat rate for that. We say you can't charge more than X for an extra bag of garbage. That might have an impact overall on all consumers that we as a policymaking body or you as staff might say, you know what, on balance, I think that's not appropriate, or you might have already looked at it and said, you know what, we found out and 50% of the people in Bothell will 4 times a year leave out an extra bag of garbage. So we don't want to have that be too high because it would discourage them from doing it or for another policy reason. I don't know.
And we did look at some of those additional fees and examine, numbers used. We looked at information we had from our current hauler. So we did that examination.
Okay.
We did look at some different things that could be moved around. And this is the result of that analysis.
Okay.
So we did pick on some of those items and say, okay, well, what if we, could we look at this? So there was some analysis done into that.
Okay. So I would just invite them if their answer is, hey, I don't think we couldn't offer you any additional savings, that's fair as well. But I'd invite them. I'd invite our
Dan Bridges will come forward.
Okay, thanks.
Dan Bridges, General Manager for Recology Cleanscapes. I think the simple answer is no, we're not able to offer any further savings on an extra, on a higher extra rate. Simply, we did a lot of work to get to where we are because of the way your rates are structured. It was a little bit tough to get there because of your rate structure, but we got there, and there's just not enough extra revenue to be able to extra revenue for extra bags to bring any substantial savings to the bottom line.
Okay.
And the higher the rate is, the less people use it, the less revenue there is. So it's
Okay.
tough to get there. So.
All right. Can you elaborate just for a second about our particular rate structure? Is there something about it that you would propose changing, or is it something that because you said it was kind of tough, is it?
Well, when the RFP was issued and we stood here and talked about our rates before, and there were questions asked about the discrepancies, we did our numbers on a true cost of service, what it truly costs to do the work in any sector. The rates that we've negotiated are not cost of service rates. They're based on at least our cost of service rates, they're based on your rate structure. So we had to move some things around to make the revenue whole, because that's what's important to us, is it takes X amount of revenue to do the job and make a margin.
So in essence, because when the bids came in, yours I think was the highest for residential, but it was the lowest for commercial, and so to meet our rate structure, which is favorable to residents, you kind of swap that. Okay, all right, that's fair.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you.
Sure, Councilmember Evans.
So can you bring the chart up again of the rates, how we compare with the surrounding communities?
Sorry about that. This one?
Yes.
Okay.
So, assuming that those others are going to go up potentially in 2014, we're still less than in 2015 of what they are currently in 2014, if I'm reading that right.
Correct. So what happens is most of the contracts have some language related to CPI rate increase adjustments that they're making, or their administrative fees, or a combination of those. And so we don't know what those assumed numbers are yet, but what we do know is what they're currently paying. So what we did was just give you that baseline to see the analysis.
So we're less than what they're currently paying.
Correct.
And if they go up in 2015, the other agencies, we're going to be even more less than they are.
Exactly.
Okay, and to follow up on Councilmember Lamb's comments about the rates, and it was true that in the residential, the way the breakdown was, residential was higher than the others. But I guess what I thought I remembered somewhere back in the discussions, the staff presentations and things, that the rate increases for our current hauler and maybe even the other third hauler that proposed could have even gone higher than what we're proposing or what's being proposed in this rate increase. Is that true?
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
That was what we were anticipating, yes, as part of that process, because of the bottom line rate that was done as part of the evaluation.
Okay. So we are getting a rate increase, but it's going to be less than what it could have been had we stayed where we were at or potentially gone with someone else. And the fact is that we're still lower than our surrounding communities.
Correct. And we always anticipated that there would be a potential minimal increase to the customer. So.
Right. And I like Councilmember Lamb's approach. Can we get any lower? That's great. But
we are getting a lot for the service level that we're getting for the increase. So that's good news.
The one last question I had talks about calculating the revenue in the form of an administrative fee. It was previously called a preservation fee. We're now calling that an admin fee. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's normally we apply those funds to our road improvements and that type of thing.
Correct. We have some additional funds that were put into that, so it's also to cover program costs, but that's explained in, I believe, the agenda bill document.
So we did it on a CPI basis last time. Now it's going to be on a percentage basis of the gross revenue.
Right. There was a very specific calculation that was done, and in that was the CPI that was calculated in that currently. Okay. So what we've done is just modified that, created a flat rate, and just simplified that calculation.
So the CPI will not be applied at any point in the future to these calculations?
We still use the CPI. It's part of the process, as I understand, but it's just a different formula that we're using, the way that we're doing the formula. So it's just a change in that formula.
Do we know what that percentage is?
We get what we get is a notification every year that tells us what that percentage is. We go through the report.
CPI, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, what the hauler is going to be, they're going to be using a percentage of the hauler's gross monthly revenue. What is that percentage?
8%. Okay, so it's the 8%.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Oh, one other question. What size propane cylinders are we talking about here?
Those are the small propane cylinders.
The Coleman size?
Yeah, the camping. Is that a good connection
okay.
piece?
Okay. And pressure washing, why would we contract with them for pressure washing?
It's an additional service that's available. It's, it highlights, graffiti, pressure washing, all of those types of services that we may need. But they're good additional services that they found in other cities are helpful. Again, with all of those services, we would make sure to, have additional conversations on those, but they are available amenities that we have as part of this contract.
And even snow plowing. I think that's...
Hey, it might help.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other question? Anybody? Councilmember Sandberg.
I wanted to follow on Councilmember Evans' question about the annual CPI modification, because I didn't quite understand that, and just trying to think about it from a ratepayer's perspective. They're going to pay something in 2015, and then the CPI increases. How is that going to affect the rate? And I've heard that it does affect or it doesn't affect going forward. So
it's a calculation that we do inside of the charge that they see. So I think that's why to some people they feel like it doesn't affect. But we, however, do that analysis as part of our review every year. So what happens is that they're sending us the detail of the current rates, the upcoming anticipated rates that would be received under that CPI change with that formula, and then we review those, analyze those, and give them an agreement to accept those new rates.
So can you?
So it does affect.
Yeah. So can you put the rate, the new rate?
Yep. Oops.
So for 2015, a residential 35-gallon cart customer is going to pay 56 cents more a month for their weekly service.
Correct.
And so when CPI increases, they're going to pay more than, that 56 is going to increase over time?
In that next year, you would see that we would go through the process of analyzing that rate.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And then one of the bigger concerns when we were talking about the three proponents was labor disputes and disruptions in service.
Correct.
And in this new contract language, it says that the city will collect daily performance fees during strikes.
Yes.
And they're really significant. Like, if the strike goes longer than 14 days, it's $20,000 a day or something like that. So do you feel like all of this contract language is a significant improvement over the contract language that we have with our current hauler and would address all of those concerns?
I do. We, in fact, took time with the consultant, the city attorney, and our staff to go through looking at that language and even developing the section that we developed related specifically to that labor disruption. It gives us some more instances and actions that we can take, and we learn that, and we basically use the case history from the past, as we talked about last time, to really help improve the contract with language that's specific to addressing those areas of concern. So really, I think it's necessary in the fact that we've learned from history, and so what we tried to do was improve upon that history and provide language that really gave us the information and the tools we needed to make sure that service was started again. Because overall, our goal here is to make sure that customers receive their service curbside. And when we have a strike, that business has a strike, we are impacted by that, and our customers are impacted in that they're not getting collection. So our goal is to get them to start that collection again, or at least have options where we could go about the process of getting collection started. So that's the reason for those fees.
And then in the event of any kind of disruption in service, even if it's weather-related, there are provisions in there for drop-off locations. So
yes.
And was that in our current contract?
We have some provisions in the current contract. Really, what we just try to do with this contract is learning from other cities as they're, correcting theirs, is improve that. So what we always do is with our hauler have what we call a winter inclement weather plan, and what we do is sit down and really chart out what it is, what are the actions we're going to take, what steps do we want to take, how we make sure that citizens are informed. So all of those steps are addressed. So this is just, the contract is just making sure that we do those. That's why it talks about that plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Ingham.
So our current recycling and yard waste bins, are those 64-gallon carts?
The current yard
that we
waste?
have at our houses right now?
It actually depends. For yard waste, we have 64 standard. But what happened is that with annexation, we had some customers who had 96 in the annexation area. So it just depends on where you're at. And we've been working with Waste Management currently to get people into the blue container, which I believe is 64. So that's what we've been trying to do. But I'd have to confirm that. I'd have to double check that for you.
So on January 1, will we have different containers, and will they be the same size and color and stuff as they are now?
That's what we're working through with the hauler. We would be determining that, but we would have clear education materials to outline that for the customers. That's part of the process in changing over. We would be giving people up-to-date information as to what's going to change and giving them advance notification.
But they'll likely continue to be 64-gallon containers for recycling and yard waste?
I can say that, yes, if we change carts, our goal is to keep our size as well as work towards making sure there's consistent coloring out there to help customers do a better job.
And then I've got two more questions. So the bulky waste that you can have picked up on the curbside?
Yes.
What defines bulky waste? Is that like a bed mattress or like a couch or?
Yeah, so actually in the rates, there's a section that's outlined called bulky waste, and it is exactly that. It's things like sofas, mattresses. There's a couple of other large items in there. And we have, in fact, checked with Recology Cleanscapes to also confirm in some of those areas like mattresses, the market's changing. There's new services provided. Could we start looking at those? And they have agreed to do that.
So I could just throw a couch on the corner or on the street, and they're going to throw it in the truck for me?
As long as you call them for a special pickup, yes.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, it's going to be a whole other kind of call.
That's fancy.
And you're going to be billed. And there's a rate for that they will let you know about.
Okay. And then kind of going back, you don't need to flip back to the chart, but what's going on in Woodinville? Why are they paying twice as much for the same service that we're going to be?
So Woodinville doesn't have a contract currently. They're under the WTC rates. So similar to the King County customers we had that just annexed in, they're under a different rate structure because they don't have a contract situation in their city. So they're not going through this process. They're going under the WTC rates that are established. So that's the reason for the higher rates.
And so all those rates that we saw, those are all probably going to have an increase in 2015.
I would assume so, yeah, depending on the contract and the specifics of the language and how their rates are adjusted. So like I said, I think it would be CPI, administrative fees, things like that.
So we're getting a really good rate for residential, I mean.
As the staff were presenting, yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
We're getting some really great services for a really great rate.
Okay, that's all I had, thanks.
Councilmember Agnew?
So the citizens that just annexed into the city, are they going to be covered under these rates?
No, they are not. Waste Management has the rights to that area for 7 years from the date of annexation, so they are not.
Okay.
Sorry, Aaron would like to.
Just wanted to clarify, though, that they won't continue to be under the WUTC rates. They will have the existing City of Bothell Waste Management rates, so they will see a reduction in their rates from what they had previously. Sorry to butt in.
No, excellent point. And we're using that contract that we currently have as well. And we understand that we'll be managing 2 contracts, and we are prepared for that.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I guess this is coming back on May 20th, correct?
Yes.
Would council be looking for consensus on whether we want this on consent or okay with putting it on consent? No? Okay. Then we'll have another presentation on the 20th.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there any other business, City Manager?
None.
Okay. Any committee reports that may have popped up while we're going through our meeting?
I was just going to say, this morning, the city manager and I had an opportunity to be at the Anderson Building with the McMiniman brothers as they made a presentation to some of their investors. All the city council members have a packet that was passed out there today, and it was just a really great and exciting meeting to hear them outline their vision for the building, and also to hear the excitement amongst the people who are going to be investing in that building and what they're looking forward to. So it's an exciting development, and it was a good morning.
Great, thank you. Anything for the good of the order? No? Moved by Councilmember Evans, second by Councilmember Agnew. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.